As now the company expands into different areas, the level of competition is also becoming broader. As you go into the future, how are you positioning your company?
It costs a lot of money. You can't put a price tag on that because it's evergreen. Once that evidence is created and it's written, it's a historical piece that anyone can reference. Our long-term view is essentially the same view that the historical company was built on, which is the credibility of what it takes to stand independently at a time that the news can be polarizing and sides need to be taken, that the news that the New York Times serves pierces through and really goes where the truth is. Because essentially, what is a product manager's job if it's not to inspire goodwill and good empathy towards real world problems? But the digital transformation journey is pretty short in comparison to the longevity of this business. So it's 175 years old, but the digital transformation happened in the past 10 years.
Hey, this is Carlos, CEO of Product School and your host on the Product Podcast. I'm excited about this episode because it was recorded live in our New York studio with Sneha Rao, who's the Vice President of Product at the New York Times. Sneha recently spoke at ProductCon New York, where she tackled a crucial but often overlooked topic, building scalable platform products. So I invited her back to dive even deeper into this complex subject. Founded in 1851, the New York Times has undergone a significant digital transformation over the past decade, evolving from a print-centric business to a digital-first news and lifestyle platform, with over 10 million paid subscribers and more than 100 million weekly active users globally. The company has a market cap of over $9 billion and annual revenue of $2.4 billion. At the New York Times, Sneha leads the platform engineering team, overseeing key areas such as publishing, payment flows, AI, subscription revenue, ad targeting, and game development. Before joining the New York Times, Sneha spent 6.5 years at Spotify, where she led the service platform team. In this episode, we explore her approach to building and scaling platform products, strategies for driving digital transformation within a large enterprise, expansion tactics to grow the New York Times into a multi-product media company, and methods for identifying leading indicators of revenue growth. We also delve into the science of running multiple experiments to enhance the user experience. One of my favorite parts is Sneha's perspective on the future of news consumption and how the New York Times is positioning itself to meet evolving reader expectations in an increasingly digital landscape. Let's dive in.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Sneha.
Thank you for having me. This is cool.
I'm excited to do this in person from New York with the super VP of product from the New York Times.
I mean, super is a very cool way to describe it, but I appreciate it. I've worked with you for 10 years. I've seen the genesis of Product School, so I'm really excited to be here in this moment.
Yeah, we have so many people in common, and product management wasn't cool back in the day. So I'm glad that now there's a platform, for the real builders to also showcase their work.
Yeah.
And you were a speaker at our conference in New York a few months ago.
I was, and it was very cool to talk to a live audience. There were over 1,000 people sitting in the audience, tens of thousands of people streaming. It was wild, the scale, the magnitude, and the impact of the conversations that we're able to have now thanks to this platform is very cool.
Maybe that wasn't part of the original job description. But I think that's becoming now a thing for product leaders to also feel very comfortable in different situations as they tell their story and communicate how they build.
Yeah. I think it's important to share the art and craft and the love and the passion of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because essentially, what is a product manager's job if it's not to inspire goodwill and good empathy towards real world problems? So being able to talk about it for me personally is a little therapeutic. It's like catharsis. You're connecting with all the doubts and fears and anxiety and transforming it into digestible nuggets of bites that they help me, and I hope that it helps someone else who's listening as well. Yeah, that's how I see it.
Well, let's find out.
Yeah.
So you are the VP of product, but mostly you focus on platform, right?
Yes.
What is platform at the New York Times?
That is, do you want the easy answer or do you want the...
No, give me the hardcore answer.
There is no standard definition of what a platform is. For the New York Times, the platform from the end user's perspective is, you may have an iOS device like an iPhone, and you download the New York Times app on it. That is your platform. That experience of how you scroll through your news, engage with a game, read through cooking, all of that is essentially the platform. However, the way I see it, I'm behind the scenes. I'm in the backstage of that app. There are dozens of platforms that are supporting that. So my job is a platform engineering product leader, connecting the dots between how we publish, how we, do our payment flows, how we, do our subscription revenue targeting, how we do ad targeting, how we, create these games and new games that are engaging and keep experimenting with it. And at the end of the day, there's also the bits and bytes of how that experience is served. So how it is experienced by an individual sitting in New York City with the highest bandwidth versus someone in a developing country that has a constrained bandwidth, maybe a smaller device and a smaller phone. That is my job. How do I leverage what the technology has to offer and package it up so that that experience is uniform? So the content for someone who's interested in reading about, I don't know, the crazy presidential elections that we're in right now, and they want to read about it sitting anywhere in the world, that they have the same uniform experience. That's the job. And it's really complicated, as you can imagine.
Especially because the company was started in 1851, right? And obviously went through huge transformation. It's a big digital platform today. So how much of the original pieces, tech, were able to be repurposed versus now you're trying to re-platform some of that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. It's 175 years old. I mean, just sit on that. How often does that happen? Like a digital transformation at this magnitude, with this history and this legacy is really, it's an honor to be associated with it. So, but the digital transformation journey is pretty short in comparison to the longevity of this business. So it's 175 years old, but the digital transformation happened in the past 10 years. It started sometime, I'd say, I experienced it. So I'm a boomerang. I worked at the Times in 2014 and 15, and I saw the start of the digital transformation where print was the primary source of revenue. And but there was a recognition, the cat videos and the engagement had started, virality had started in 2014. And the New York Times was aware of what that meant, and it was disruptive, but there was no solution in mind because everyone was reading hard copy newspapers. So from that moment of this is going to break the paradigm. This is going to shake us up to where we are in 2024, launching the coolest viral games like Wordle and Sportle, if you've heard of it. It's like a sports football version of Wordle, which is cool. Sort of like reinventing the way we cook in our households and now the way we, spice up our recipes and have Instacart, connect the recipe ingredients, ship it in your cart, deliver it the day of your date night so you can actually prepare that romantic dinner. This journey, I couldn't have seen it 10 years ago, which is perhaps my fault. I left and, I came back because I saw it happen.
But you left to Spotify.
I did. And there was a lot of guilt in that decision because I wouldn't be back at the Times if I didn't care deeply about what it stands for. So there was a lot of guilt in leaving. But I was young and, when a good opportunity comes knocking on your door and you sort of weigh your options, it just was the right moment for me. I had just started in my product journey. I had just become a technical product manager for the first time in 2015 at the Times. And there was so much I needed to learn. And I wanted to work at a company that was at the forefront of that. And that was Spotify for me, based in New York. They were they were on the 18th Street. They was in Chelsea, a really tiny little office. And now they're in 4 World Trade Center with the green spiral at the top of the building. I mean, it's wild to see this growth. But when I started at Spotify in 2016, we were 1,500 employees. And that felt like scale to me. When I left 6.5 years later, we were 10,000 employees. That's... so I did experience a lot of new tech, new product craft. And I also geeked out on technology in a way that, I love what I do, and I like to share what I do because I feel like there are a lot of technical engineers, technical project managers, technical data scientists, people who are actually building, and designers who are building systems, like are thinking systematically about infrastructure and how it can propel innovation, who who could hear me talk about what product management in this space could mean, and it might inspire them to think about it.
Yeah. And what are some of those big learnings at Spotify that you were able to then bring back to your next act at the New York Times?
At Spotify, I was a part of like 3 journeys. So it was 6.5 years, but boy, were those 6.5 years like big ones. So 2016 to 2018 was like, I was hired in 2016 with the task to help Spotify go public in 2018. Like I knew that was the target. 2 years or 18 months from that moment that I was hired, they wanted to launch. What I didn't know was GDPR was knocking on the door as well. So like 6 months after I joined, compliance was like this huge complication that every enterprise was trying to make sense of because the legislation was not clear. It was, it just talked about user protection and privacy, but it didn't actually give you the toolkit. It didn't tell you how to implement it. So in that moment, I helped Spotify, which is a rebellious brand, had like broken glass often in order to build what they did, get compliant. And I cannot tell you how strange a dynamic that was to walk in the room and say, I love what you do, but now I'm going to help you do it with audit trails, and I'm going to help you do it with restrictions of who can access information and who can query data. Like I was getting into the weeds and actually blocking a lot of what was freestyling at Spotify. And then the next experience that I had at Spotify was sort of launching to the world. So Spotify at that moment was in the Western Hemisphere, doing really well in EU, doing really well in Americas, but it had not launched to third world countries. It had not launched in the Middle East, APAC, Latin America. It had not. So to scale, and to scale that far was something I experienced. And then I'd say 2020 to 2022 was all about like reinventing what Spotify was. It was a music entertainment platform, but now it had suddenly become an audio streaming network where podcasts were relevant and audiobooks were relevant. And there was just a lot of like new products being shipped through that singular platform experience that I started with. Like the way I described the New York Times platform is that app on your phone. Spotify is that app on your phone, but there's so much complexity under that. And that's essentially all the experiences that I've squeezed, learned, extracted, hopefully given back, and brought with me to the Times. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do here.
Exactly. And I want to go even deeper here because I can imagine, I want to learn more about the org design for a platform team. Maybe we can talk about that at Spotify and how you're thinking about building now your team for the New York Times.
Yeah. So when I left Spotify, I left a fairly large organization that I had handcrafted during COVID, which was like bizarre. The team that I was, leading, so I was the head of product of service infrastructure. For those who don't know what service infrastructure is, it's essentially back-end components. It's the things you're not thinking about. I have this microphone in front of me. You're seeing the microphone. You're not seeing the wiring, the acoustics, and the infrastructure it took to build this. That's what I'm referring to. The back end of this platform experience is what I was leading at Spotify. And the primitives of that were compute, networking, storage, observability, like telemetry to know when a certain app went down or you couldn't hear the specific track that you were listening to. We had telemetry that was telling us all of that. And this at the end of the day, everything that I'm talking about, like compute, storage, all of these are building blocks. These are building blocks that can be connected together as a developer experience. And that's where Backstage came about. Backstage is this internal developer platform that I'm really proud of, that I was a part of at Spotify, that is open sourced, and now they have like a whole SaaS business associated with it. So all of that required product leadership. So the org design at that time, going back to your question, was there were 4 product areas. I had 4 product leaders. So a combination of group product managers as well as principal product managers owning each of those domains: computer networking, storage and databases, platform developer experiences, and observability. I used to call them the cops. I know it's a strange word, but I called them the cops because I think of operations as a way of controlling, like holding the line, like sort of holding the perimeter. So, having, if you worked in the cloud, or if you don't, I can share this nugget of information. They get expensive really fast. You may not even know it. You could sleep overnight on like a website that you built, and it could cost you an arm and a leg the very next day. You could get a $10,000 bill and not even realize that you spent that money. It's invisible cost. Now imagine an enterprise that's building platforms at that scale. We're talking millions. So the cops were the guys, was the team that was actually protecting the interests of Spotify. They were watching the costs. They were making sure that we weren't overspending and that we had protections and compliance. So that was the team. I had the 4 product leaders. I also had a team of data scientists, researchers, and evangelists in a way. They reported into a senior analytics manager. I think that was like the title.
Evangelist?
Yes.
What do an evangelist do?
So that's such a good question. Now I'm talking about building blocks, right? So this is one kind of mic, and there are like thousands. So each type of platform or application or experience that the user gets through requires a combination of the building blocks, but not each application will have the same pattern. It's like, building, I don't know, I'm not good at Lego, so I'm not going to go there, but it's just kind of like imagining an application that has like a high touch point, and that requires a harder like front-end interface and more responsive interface versus something that's like highly transactional, like that's taking payments at a faster rate, where, the back-end databases and the storage strategy and the caching strategy really matters. So an evangelist is essentially someone who's talking through with a team, like a product and engineering team. Okay, cool. You're trying to build this app. What are you trying to do with it? Like, what is your end goal? What is your success metric? Like, are you trying to build something that is going to have like a high response rate? Like, are you expecting a lot of users hitting it at the same time? What is your concurrency? Like, are you expecting like 1 million people subscribing at the same second? That matters when you're building these applications. And then they would sort of recommend which one of those building blocks that these product teams that were in my org could then sort of help ship that. So it was like a well-oiled platform as a service that I had, sort of built within Spotify.
That sounds like mini PMs or concierges that are trying to help the technical people leverage existing information that already exists so they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was doing it. I was learning as I was going. There wasn't a blueprint in front of me. Like, I can't say that I wish that I was in an industry at the time that there were front runners and that I could follow, because I was learning, growing, and doing all at the same time. So is that the best design for what I did? I'm not sure. But in that moment, it made the most sense. You needed product domain experts to think through the decisions, the success criteria.
And now you have an opportunity to also redesign your own org. So as you do this now, what are the things that you are trying to do differently?
Boy, I've learned a lot, Carlos. I think one of the big learnings that I had from this experience at Spotify, which I loved, and I give a lot of regard to who I have become as a product manager, as a product leader, to my experience at Spotify. One of my key takeaways there was maybe a platform team doesn't need to be as large as it was. And I say that with recognition that is it is a decision that I had taken as well. But it's good to sort of accept what could have been better. So at the end of the day, Spotify's business was music consumption and then audio consumption. Along the way, we'd built a 2,000-person platform org in a 10,000-person org. That's a heavy investment in platforms. And it felt like the only way at that moment because we were building so rapidly and we were growing so rapidly that you just, money wasn't the driver. Money wasn't a factor that we were sort of like really optimizing for. But then you look at the past couple of years and you see the impact that it's had on the workforce. And that for me has, hindsight 2020, maybe we really shouldn't have grown that org that big. So that's what I'm bringing to the Times. It's how do we build those same capabilities for speed, for compliance, for scale, for safety, security, and essentially do all of that, but not at the cost of the consumer end of what the New York Times really requires. I think platform should always be a smaller proportion of the investment. And, that means hard choices, like if I have to build versus buy. The trade-off there is if it costs me, in the short term, it might cost me more to buy, but in the long term, like if I am able to forecast what the denominations and the attribution costs would be, it may be worth the expenditure rather than building a product and engineering team to build the exact same thing that vendors do so much better. So that's what I mean by like, I experienced it, I've learned it, and I'm bringing that.
And I think also timing is very different now.
Yeah.
The technology for these SaaS tools has evolved so much where there's more options out there for things to buy that can get you there faster rather than trying to build yourself.
Yeah, 100%. It's that much easier. I was just at a conference the past 2 days, and the vendor I was speaking with, they were talking about, what helped them build their business was, networking, caching, like geeking out on like the speed of light and like sort of thinking through the parameters that would help companies serve quicker responses to whatever experiences they were driving. It's a pure networking play. But 10 years, 15 years later, the founders themselves, are recognizing that maybe the market has shifted and the timing has shifted. And, I agree with that. There's this platformization play that vendors are now giving, which means that they're turnkey solutions that enterprises don't need to build anymore.
So how are you thinking about success metrics for a platform product?
It depends on what the platform is, serving. But some of the platforms, so I'll give examples of things I'm actively thinking about at this moment. So my current team at the New York Times, we call ourselves delivery engineering, though I'm not a big fan of the name and it's no hidden secret, because I think that it just captures a part of what we do. And I think that the remit is really platform engineering. It's much larger. So over there, the things that matter the most is how quickly can we take an idea to market. So New York Times is experimenting a lot. We're transforming the format in which we serve, the way we serve content, from a static page to visual, like video podcasts are like a thing that we've started playing with and toiling with, live blogs, live chats. There's a lot of dynamic rendering of content that's happening on what is quote unquote traditional news. And each one of that is an experiment. each one of that has an A/B test associated with it. We're testing and learning with our consumers. And, at 10 million subscribers, we have scale that we can actually make those decisions. So for me and my team in delivery engineering, what we're thinking about is, all right, we want to propel that. And we want to make it that much faster and that much more efficient. So that means how quickly can product and engineering teams across the times have an idea, deploy it, test it, and learn from it. The quicker that happens, the quicker we grow. And we're trying to take that down to like hours. What used to take months, we're trying to do that in
order
hours.
to go from idea to running experiment?
Yes. We've shortened the time span of taking an idea, writing your first line of code and deploying it to under an hour now. And if we can do that, the next set of that is what sort of experimentation and treatment and variants do you want to build? And, again, it's plug and play now. There are a lot of platforms that we can buy off the shelf that can do that for us. So that is the success criteria. How quickly can we get this done? How quickly can we validate an idea? And how quickly can we scale an idea? Like once the experiment points us in a direction that is validation, that we should, it's a success. How do we scale that? How do we fan that out, not just to our subscribers, which are our core audience, but our readers, our registered users, which are, in the scale of over 100 million readers, and especially in a presidential election time where we have the most eyeballs, like every impression matters.
And I can imagine there are other success metrics around reliability, right?
Yes.
If you are serving such a big user base, you can't afford for the platform to go down. So what are these other key components that you monitor almost on a daily basis and are your North Star?
Yeah. Are you ready to be
Yes.
nerd typed? Okay. So something we think about a lot is, and I actually have a metric that I can point to, which I'm so excited about. It just came through. Big shout out to my data scientists who got that done. There's this metric called mean time to detect, which is essentially how quickly, when something breaks, how quickly can your telemetry, your signal prompt you and alert you that, your first responders, how quickly can they tell you that something broke? Mean time to detect is like this industry standard. But what we found at the Times is we prefer to work with medians. And there's a reason for that, because there are a lot of outliers at the edges that we want to ignore, and they don't support our cause. So what that means is we don't want to look at like a legacy system that was built 100 years ago and that no one could detect an issue with it. Yes, of course, because it's it's hidden in tech that is outdated and no one really knows how to run. And yes, it has issues, and we're well aware of that. But that shouldn't derail our cloud native new tech. So that's an example of like a resiliency like metric. Other metrics that we're looking at is like time to the cost to serve. So product managers love thinking about new ideas. Every product manager, every team has hundreds of ideas. Great, love it. Good for you. We have 90 teams. Now think about 1,000 ideas on the table. Not every idea is worth even experimenting on. I mean, you have to have some sort of checks and balances. We're not at that point to do it yet, but what I dream about is to be able to go like, yes, and that idea is going to cost you $1 million. Are you sure you want to experiment on it? Do you know what the ROI is? Like, what is your ROI projection? All right. If it costs that, if it crosses that threshold, let's go. If it doesn't, let's go back to the whiteboard and like rethink this. Is this the best use of our resources, of our, our technology, our people? Could we build something else? Maybe 20 other features for the cost of that one experience that wouldn't even have the ROI. I think we're at a state in our platform engineering that we can actually do that. We can actually talk about the cost to serve those experiences at the same rate at which the ideation is happening. Mm-hmm. And I find that innovative because I haven't seen it.
I think that's powerful because as I think of platform by default, it sounds more like a cost center. So finding opportunities to actually show revenue generation, it just makes a bigger case.
Yeah.
And it helps everybody think that not everything has to be around just saving money, which is important, but there is also a connection to revenue as well.
100%. And any innovative company should be thinking about that so that we don't get into these traps. I'm sorry to say, it's heartbreaking to see all these companies letting go of like good workforce. And I think it goes back to like a lot of like back of the math, like accounting there are many other factors, but it's just about, good governance and really thinking through the cost to create, the cost to serve, and whether we have the right people and whether we need those people. Like really asking those hard questions before you go on this journey and you build a thing only to realize it was a bad idea, and then you let go of thousands of good people. I just think there has to be a better way.
And as taking the conversation a kind of step higher here, you mentioned that New York Times now is pretty much an entertainment and media platform that has not just news, but video games, podcasts, so many other things. So how do you think of that as a bundle? I see that at the end of the day, when I'm a client, I buy the subscription and I have access to all of these different products. I don't always use all of them. So what are those different journeys, and how are you thinking about bundling that?
All the tough questions coming at once. Here's the thing. I think we're thinking it through. I think we're figuring this out as we go. The key moment that I want to hone in on is digital transformation. It sounds like a label that you just kind of turn on, but that's not the truth, right? There's a lot that goes into like that journey of sort of figuring out what is it that would help an audience that paid you for an experience that you're essentially dropping and taking them on a journey and keeping them loyal across that line. That is essentially where we still are. So our loyal readers, our New York Times readers, have traditionally been print media users. The younger generations have obviously grown up with screens and have started adapting to like this new audience, this new app experience, iOS, Android, web experience. And with that, we're recognizing, well, where are they spending their time? Like, where are their eyeballs going? And, news is important. I read the news. I hope everyone tries to stay informed, but it can be hard sometimes, It can be dark. It can be, it can cause some anxiety at times. And sometimes you want to just like break free and you just want to like go pet your dog and play a cat video. And not that we're in the cat video business, but, our sort of like response to that is like building something fun and engaging and entertainment that really, truly takes you away from news, but it builds on the reputation of what the journalism is, like spelling bee, like crosswords, Wordle. It's all play with words that we're really good at. Our readers are English readers, and they're inquisitive and they're curious, and they enjoy the independence, and they like. They have a vocabulary that they're always building and growing on. So building games in that remit sort of takes you away, and still extends their engagement. And that's essentially the same sort of journey that many of the products that you talked about, like podcasts and cooking and audio and wirecutter is another cool one. If you've never experienced it, I highly recommend it. You never know that you're in the business of wirecutter till you've experienced what wirecutter has for you. I ended up purchasing, I find this so ridiculous. I'm very frugal. I don't like spending a lot of money, but I ended up spending $120 on these silk pillowcases because it was a good deal. And, I recommend it because Wirecutter attested it. They've tested thousands of silk pillow covers, and they told me the one that I needed for my hair.
I think as now the company expands into different areas, the level of competition is also becoming broader. Because I can imagine if the goal is to have people spend more time, not just with news, but in other facets of life. I'm thinking about social media and thinking about streaming platforms. At the end of the day, they are all trying to launch video games or different content formats that are easier to consume than a long article. So as you go into the future, like how are you positioning your company?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question for our CEO. I think as I understand the vision is we will always bet on news. We will always bet on independent journalism, and that comes at a cost. And the power of that independent journalism and to go places where no one else can, and to really go with like the long form of like investigative like pieces that are formed with months and weeks and years of like background research. It costs a lot of money, and you can't put a price tag on that because it's evergreen. Like once that evidence is created and it's written, it's a historical piece that anyone can reference. Kids will reference New York Times articles in their education. That's how we see it. So our long-term view is essentially the same view that the historical company was built on, which is the credibility of what it takes to stand independently at a time that the news can be polarizing and sides need to be taken, that the news that the New York Times serves pierces through and really goes where the truth is. And all of the bundles that we're building around it is just in support of that, if that makes sense. Like we want to keep our audiences engaged, but at all roads, at the end of the day, we want them to keep finding relevant pieces of content that will help educate them and keep them aware of the surroundings that they live in. And that's why we're experimenting with formats like video, podcast, audio, and who knows, there's a lot more that we're thinking about that you will experience. That is for those younger audiences. My kids are 3 and 5. I don't really know when they're teenagers what will be relevant for them, but I talk about how I read the news, and they get inspired by that. It feels like this foreign innate object for them, but I try to inspire them to understand the genesis of where things start and help them see how they can sort of build on that. So, I'm not a fortune teller. I can't tell you what the next 175 years for the New York Times is, but I can tell you that if there's anything I believe pretty strongly will never really waver is that mission.
Well, thank you, Sneha, for your time, for dissecting platform product with me today.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been lots of fun.